The widowed millionaire's triplets never walked, ... until the poor waitress did the impossible. The wind hit the glass windows like it had something to prove. It rattled the frames, howled through the cracks, and made the overhead lights in the near-empty restaurant flicker just enough to feel unsettling. Samantha Parker wiped down the last table in her section, her rag moving in slow, practiced circles. The vinyl squeaked under the pressure. She'd done this 1,000 times. Wipe, rinse, repeat, but tonight felt different. Heavier, somehow. She glanced toward the private dining area in the back. That's where they were. 3 identical pairs of eyes, big, dark, scared, stared out from beneath a single yellow pendant light that swayed gently with each gust of wind. The boys sat strapped into a custom triple stroller, the kind you don't see unless someone has money to burn. Their legs were covered in expensive blankets, soft, monogrammed, the kind that cost more than Samantha's weekly paycheck. But the blankets didn't move. The legs didn't move. Liam, Caleb, and Ethan Collins, 7 years old triplets, their father, Nathan Collins, sat across from them, a stack of documents spread out in front of him like a paper fortress. He was signing something, always signing something, his pen scratching across the pages with the kind of rhythm that suggested he'd rather be anywhere else. His jaw was tight, his shoulders hunched. He looked like a man who'd learned to speak quietly so he wouldn't wake up old memories. The restaurant manager hovered nearby, wringing her hands. "Mr. Collins, I really think. Well, maybe it's better not to bring the boys out. You know how people can be." Staring, whispering, she said it like she cared. But Samantha had worked there long enough to know the manager just didn't want the uncomfortable vibe scaring off other customers. Nathan didn't look up. "They're my sons. They deserve to leave the house." The manager opened her mouth, then closed it. She shot Samantha a look-your section. Your problem and disappeared into the kitchen. Samantha exhaled through her nose and grabbed a water pitcher. She didn't need to refill anyone's glass, but it gave her a reason to walk past their table, to look. She wasn't sure why she felt drawn to them, but she did. Maybe it was the way the boys sat so still, like they were holding their breath. Maybe it was the way their father's hand shook, just slightly, every time he turned a page. She was halfway across the room when it happened. A glass tipped. Not a dramatic crash, just a gentle roll off the edge of the table. But when it hit the tile floor, it shattered loud enough to make everyone jump. The sound was sharp, violent in the quiet space. The triplets flinched in unison, their bodies curling inward like they were trying to disappear. Liam's hands shot up to his ears. Caleb's breath came fast and shallow. Ethan's eyes went wide, glassy with unshed tears. Nathan froze, pen still in hand, staring at the shards of glass like they were an accusation. Samantha didn't think. She just moved. She set the pitcher down on the nearest table and crossed the room in 4 quick steps. She crouched low, so low her knees hit the cold tie. Lan brought herself to eye level with the boys. She didn't reach for them, didn't touch, just stayed there. "Hey," she said softly, "it's okay. It's just glass. Nothing scary. Just glass." Liam was the first to look at her. His hands were still pressed over his ears, but his eyes found hers, dark brown, rimmed red, searching her face like he was trying to figure out if she was safe. Samantha smiled. Not the customer service smile she'd perfected over 3 years of slinging plates and making nice with rude strangers. This one was real, small, warm. "It's okay," she said again. And then so slowly, it almost didn't happen. She leaned forward and rested her forehead against Liam's. Just for a second. Just long enough for him to know she was there. His hands dropped from his ears. His breathing slowed, and then God. She almost missed it. His fingers reached out, tiny, trembling, uncertain. They brushed against hers. It was the smallest thing. A touch that barely registered, but it changed the air in the room. Samantha stayed there, crouched on the floor, her knees aching against the tile. She didn't care. She let Liam hold her fingers, let Caleb's breathing sync with hers, let Ethan's wide eyes relax just a little behind her. Nathan finally moved. He stood, knocking his chair back slightly, and stared down at the scene like he didn't know what to make of it. Like he'd forgotten what it looked like when someone touched his sons without flinching. "I'm sorry," he said quietly. His voice was rough, like he didn't use it much there. They get startled easily. Samantha glanced up at him but didn't stand. "It's okay, kids get scared, it happens. They're not." Nathan trailed off, rubbing the back of his neck. "They're not like other kids." Samantha looked back at the triplets. at Liam's fingers still wrapped around hers, at Caleb's chest rising and falling steadily now, at Ethan's mouth, which had curved just slightly at the edge, not quite a smile, but close. "Yeah," she said. "I can see that," but she didn't say it the way the manager had. She didn't say it like it was a problem. Nathan stared at her for a long moment. Then he sat back down, slower this time, and picked up his pen, but he didn't start signing again. He just watched. Samantha stayed there for another minute, then gently pulled her hand back. Liam let her go without a fight, though his eyes followed her as she stood. "I'll get someone to clean this up," she said, nodding toward the broken glass. Nathan nodded. "Thank you." She started to walk away, but then stopped, turned back. "What are their names?" Nathan blinked, like he wasn't used to people asking. "Liam, Caleb, and Ethan." Samantha looked at each of them in turn. "Nice to meet you guys." Ethan made a sound, soft, barely there, but it might have been a laugh. Samantha had been raised by her grandmother in a neighborhood where dignity was something you earned by showing up every day. Even when your knees were scraped and your stomach was empty. Her abuela had washed other people's clothes for 20 years. Her hands cracked and red from bleach and cold water, and she'd never once complained. "Not out loud anyway, Mia," she used to say. "You hold your head up, always. Doesn't matter if they look down on you." "You look them in the eye," Samantha tried. God, she tried. But some days it was hard to feel dignified when you were 24, living in a boarding house with peeling wallpaper, and your entire paycheck disappeared before you even cashed it. Her abuela had died 2 years ago. Heart gave out while she was folding someone else's sheets. Samantha had been folding sheets ever since. Different ones, her own. The one she couldn't afford to get cleaned anywhere but the laundromat down the street. But tonight, crouched on that cold restaurant floor with a little boy's hand in hers, she'd felt something she hadn't felt in a long time. Purpose. She didn't know why, didn't know what it meant, but she felt it all the same. And when Nathan Collins walked out of that restaurant with his 3 sons and his stack of unsigned documents, Samantha stood by the window and watched them go. The wind was still howling. The night was still cold. But something had shifted. Samantha didn't expect to see them again. The Collins family didn't exactly seem like regulars. Not at a place like Giuseppe's, where the vinyl booths were patched with duct tape and the daily special hadn't changed in 3 years, but 2 weeks after the broken glass incident. Nathan walked through the door again. Same expensive coat, same tired eyes, same 3 boys strapped into that custom stroller. This time, though, he didn't sit in the private dining area. He chose a booth near the window, where the afternoon light filtered through half-drawn blinds and painted stripes across the table. Samantha was refilling the coffee station when she spotted them, her hand stilled on the carafe, and for a second, she just watched. Liam was staring at the window, his reflection ghosting back at him. Caleb had his hands folded in his lap, fingers twitching slightly. Ethan's head was tilted back, eyes tracking the lazy rotation of the ceiling fan. They looked the same, small, fragile, frozen. But when Liam's gaze drifted across the room and landed on her, something flickered in his expression. Recognition, maybe, or hope. Samantha set the carafe down and walked over. "Hey," she said, stopping at the edge of the table. "You guys came back." Nathan looked up from the menu he wasn't really reading. "They asked to." Samantha blinked. "They did." He nodded slowly, like he was still trying to process it himself. "Liam kept pointing at the door every time we drove past," I figured. Maybe it was worth a shot. She glanced at Liam, whose eyes were still on her. There was something in the way he looked at her, something that made her chest tighten. "Well," she said, pulling out her order pad even though she didn't need to. "Welcome back." It started small after their meal, chicken tenders for the boys. Black coffee for Nathan's. Samantha found herself lingering near their table. She wasn't hovering exactly, just nearby, wiping down the counter, refilling the napkin dispenser, pretending she had a reason to be there. Nathan didn't seem to mind, if anything. He looked relieved to have someone else in the room who wasn't staring at his sons like they were a tragedy on display. When it was time to leave, Samantha walked them to the door, and as Nathan maneuvered the stroller through the narrow entryway, she noticed something on the floor near the service hallway, a bottle cap. She picked it up without thinking. Turning it over in her fingers, it was from a soda bottle, red plastic. Scratched around the edges, nothing special. But an idea sparked in the back of her mind. "Hey," she called out before Nathan could push through the door. He turned, one hand still on the stroller. Samantha held up the bottle cap. "Can I borrow them for a minute?" Nathan frowned. "Borrow them, just for a second." "I want to try something." He hesitated, his grip tightening on the stroller handles. But then Liam made a sound, a soft, hopeful hum, and Nathan's shoulders sagged. "Okay," he said quietly. But just for a minute, the service hallway was cooler than the dining room, the air tinged with the smell of bleach and old mop water. Samantha wheeled the stroller inside and crouched down, bringing herself to the boys' level. "All right," she said, holding up the bottle cap. "We're gonna play a game." 3 pairs of eyes locked onto her. She set the cap on the floor and gave it a gentle flick. It skidded across the tile, spinning slightly before coming to a stop near the wall. "See that?" she said. "That's a car. And over here." She pulled a pin from her apron pocket and drew a quick, wobbly rectangle on the floor with a piece of chalk she'd swiped from the kids' menu basket. "This is a parking spot. Think you can help me park the car?" Silence. For a moment she thought maybe she'd read it wrong. Maybe they weren't interested, maybe this was stupid, but then Caleb's hand moved. Just a little, just enough to reach forward, fingers stretching toward the bottle cap. Samantha's breath caught. "Yeah," she said softly. "Yeah, just like that. Go ahead, you can touch it." Caleb's fingers brushed the cap. He pulled back, startled by his own movement, but then slowly, carefully, he reached out again. This time he grabbed it. Samantha wanted to cheer, to shout, to grab Nathan and shake him and say, "Did you see that?" But she didn't. She just smiled and nodded. "Good job, Caleb. Now, can you slide it into the parking spot?" Caleb stared at the chalk rectangle. His hand trembled, and then, with more effort than it should have taken, he pushed the cap forward. It didn't make it to the rectangle. It veered off to the left and stopped halfway, but Samantha didn't care. "That was awesome," she said. "Let's try again." They played for 10 minutes. 10 minutes of bottle caps sliding across dirty tile. 10 minutes of boys leaning forward in their stroller, shoulders inching closer, fingers grasping and releasing and grasping again. And then Samantha saw at Liam's knee. It was barely noticeable, just a faint shift beneath the blanket. But she'd been watching closely enough to catch it. His leg had moved. Not much. Not enough for anyone else to see, but it had moved. She kept her face neutral, her voice light. "Your turn, Liam. Think you can get it all the way to the parking spot?" Liam stared at the bottle cap like it was the most important thing in the world. His hand reached out, shaking, and wrapped around it. And when he really pushed, his knee shifted again. Samantha's heart pounded so hard she thought it might crack a rib. When Nathan came to collect them, Samantha was still on the floor. Surrounded by bottle caps and chalk dust, "They did great," she said, standing and brushing off her knees. Nathan looked at the boys, at the caps scattered across the tile, at the wobbly parking spot drawing. What is this?" he asked. "Just a game," Samantha said. "Something to keep them busy." Nathan opened his mouth like he wanted to say more, but before he could, a voice cut through the hallway. "Samantha," she turned. Margaret Wallace stood at the end of the hall. Her smile so perfectly in place it looked painted on. She was dressed in a crisp gray suit, her silver hair pulled back into a flawless bun. Everything about her screamed control. "Mr. Collins," Margaret said smoothly, stepping forward. "I didn't realize you were here." "I came to pick up the boys for their afternoon session," Nathan frowned. "I didn't call you." "Oh, I know." Margaret's smile didn't waver. "But Dr. Bennett mentioned you might stop by here, and I thought I'd save you the trouble." Samantha didn't like the way Margaret's eyes flicked toward her. "Cold, calculating. The boys seem agitated," Margaret continued, her gaze settling on the triplets. "It's not healthy for them to be overstimulated by strangers." The word strangers landed like a slap. Nathan shifted uncomfortably. "They're fine." "Margaret, of course," Margaret said, her tone light but firm. "But you know how delicate they are. We wouldn't want to set back their progress." The word rang hollow in Samantha's ears. Margaret moved to take the stroller handles, and Nathan, tired, defeated, let her say goodbye. "Boys," Margaret said sweetly, but as the stroller rolled past Samantha, Liam's hand reached out, his fingers brushed hers for just a second, and then they were gone. The next day, Samantha's manager called her into the office. "We're cutting your hours," she said without preamble. Samantha stared. "What? Why?" The manager didn't meet her eyes. "Business is slow. We need to trim the schedule." "Business is always slow," Samantha shot back. "You've never cut my hours before." The manager's jaw tightened. "Well, we are now." Samantha left the office with her hands shaking and her throat tight, and when she went to look for the bottle caps she'd left in the service hallway, they were gone. 3 weeks passed like slow drip in water. Samantha's reduced hours meant smaller paychecks, which meant choosing between groceries and the electric bill. She chose groceries. The landlord at the boarding house wasn't happy about the late rent, but he wasn't surprised either. People like Samantha were always late. She tried not to think about the Collins boys. Tried not to wonder if they were still playing games. still reaching for things, still moving in ways no one else seemed to notice. But every time she closed her eyes, she saw Liam's knees shifting beneath that blanket, saw Caleb's fingers stretching toward a bottle cap, saw Ethan's almost smile. So when the manager handed her a catering assignment for a charity event at the Collins estate, Samantha's heart kicked against her ribs like it was trying to escape. "It's just serving," the manager said, barely looking up from her clipboard. "Rich people, fancy food, you know the drill. Try not to," she waved a hand vaguely, "interact too much." Samantha nodded and kept her face neutral. But inside, something ignited. The Collins estate was the kind of place you saw in movies. Wrought iron gates, a circular driveway with a fountain in the center, perfectly manicured hedges that probably cost more to maintain than Samantha's yearly salary. She arrived with the other catering staff in the back of a cramped van, all of them dressed in identical black vests and white shirts. The head server, a woman named Rita, with sharp eyes and no patience, handed out assignments like a drill sergeant. "You," she said, pointing at Samantha, "patio service. Keep the trays moving, don't linger." Samantha nodded and grabbed a tray of hors d'oeuvres that she couldn't pronounce. The patio was stunning. String lights hung overhead, casting a warm glow over clusters of well-dressed guests. A jazz quartet played in the corner. Everything smelled like expensive cologne and wine that cost more per bottle than Samantha made in a week. She wove through the crowd, offering smiles and tiny plates of food, and tried not to feel like an intruder. And then she saw them. The triplets were on the far side of the patio, parked near the edge where the stone flooring met the lawn. Their stroller faced away from the party like someone had tucked them out of sight. Nathan stood a few feet away, locked in conversation with a man in a navy suit who looked like he bought senators for breakfast. Samantha's feet moved before her brain caught up. She set her tray down on a nearby table and crossed the patio, her heart hammering when she reached the stroller. She crouched down, same as before, and brought herself to their level. "Hey guys," she said softly. 3 heads turned in unison. Liam's face lit up. Not just enough for Samantha to see the recognition in his eyes. Caleb's fingers twitched in his lap. Ethan made a sound, a quiet, breathy hum that might have been a greeting. Samantha smiled. "Miss me?" She reached into the pocket of her vest and pulled out a stub of chalk she'd grabbed from the restaurant's kid menu basket. It was yellow, worn down to a nub, but it would work. "Want to play a game?" she asked. The patio stones were smooth and pale, perfect for drawing. Samantha sketched quickly, her hand moving in broad, confident strokes. She drew a path of rectangles stretching from the stroller toward the edge of the lawn. Some she labeled hot rock in messy capital letters. Others she marked water puddle. "Okay," she said, sitting back on her heels. "Here's the deal. You step on a hot rock, your foot gets burned. You step in a puddle, you get wet. But if you can step from rock to rock without touching the hot ones or the puddles, you win." Liam stared at the chalk path like it was a treasure map. Caleb leaned forward slightly, his eyes tracking the shapes. Ethan tilted his head, processing. "I know you can't walk," Samantha said gently, "but maybe you can try to touch the rocks with your feet just a little, just to see." For a long moment, nothing happened. Then Liam's foot moved. It was tiny, barely a shift, but his toes stretched toward the first rectangle, the edge of his shoe brushing the chalk line. Samantha's breath caught. "Yes, yeah, just like that." Caleb's eyes squeezed shut, his whole body tense with concentration, and then slowly, shakily, his legs shifted, his knee bent, his foot slid an inch forward. Samantha wanted to scream, wanted to grab Nathan and drag him over and make him see, but she didn't. She stayed quiet, stayed still. "You're doing so good," she whispered. Ethan's lips curved into something that wasn't quite a smile but was close enough to make Samantha's chest ache. She didn't see Margaret approach. 1 second. Samantha was crouched on the patio, watching Liam's toes nudge a chalk rectangle. The next, a shadow fell over her, and a voice, smooth, cold, precise, cut through the air. "What do you think you're doing?" Samantha looked up. Margaret Wallace stood over her, arms crossed, her expression a perfect mask of polite disapproval. She wore a pale blue dress that probably cost more than Samantha's car, and her smile didn't reach her eyes. "I was just..." Samantha started. "The boys don't need entertainment," Margaret interrupted. "They have a very strict routine. Overstimulation can be harmful." Samantha stood slowly, brushing chalk dust off her hands. "They seemed fine to me." Margaret's smile tightened. I'm sure you mean well, but you're not a medical professional, doctor. Bennett has been very clear about what's best for them. The name landed like a stone in Samantha's stomach. Dr. Bennett, she'd heard Nathan mention him before, the specialist who oversaw the boy's care. Right, Samantha said carefully. Of course. Margaret's gaze flicked to the chalk drawings on the ground, and something dark passed through her expression. I'll have someone clean this up. She turned and walked away. Her heels clicking against the stone, Samantha watched her go, her jaw tight. Later that night, after the guests had left and the catering staff was packing up, Samantha saw Nathan standing alone near the fountain. He looked exhausted, his tie loosened, his jacket draped over one arm. She hesitated, then walked over. Mr. Collins? He turned, startled. Oh, Samantha, I didn't know you were working tonight. Last-minute assignment, she said. She shoved her hands into her pockets, suddenly unsure. Your boys, they're amazing. Nathan's expression softened. Yeah, they are. Do they? Do they ever move? Like, on their own? Nathan's face shuddered. The doctors say no. Not in any meaningful way. But what if, Samantha? His voice was gentle but firm. I appreciate what you're trying to do, but I've spent the last 3 years chasing hope, and every time it ends the same way. She wanted to argue, wanted to tell him what she'd seen, but the look in his eyes stopped her. He was tired, bone deep, soul-crushing tired, so she nodded. Okay. The next day, Samantha went back to the restaurant and found a message waiting for her. The manager handed her a small envelope. Inside was a handwritten note on expensive stationery. The boys have been prescribed a new medication to help with anxiety and muscle tension, doctor. Bennett assures us it will improve their quality of life. Please do not engage with them further, as it may interfere with their treatment. Samantha read it twice, then crumpled it in her fist. That night, she went home to her cramped boarding house room and pulled out her phone. She Googled muscle tension medication and anxiety treatment for children. Most of the results were standard, harmless, but one phrase kept popping up in forums and medical articles: sedation as a side effect. Samantha stared at the screen until her eyes burned, and then she opened her photos and looked at the picture she'd taken weeks ago, the one of the bottle cap game, the one where Caleb's hand was reaching. She zoomed in on Liam's leg, on the faint outline of his knee, bent just slightly beneath the blanket. They can move, she whispered to the empty room. And somewhere in the back of her mind, a question formed. What if someone doesn't want them to? The boarding house smelled like old coffee and damp wood. Samantha's room was on the 3rd floor, tucked at the end of a hallway that creaked with every step. The wallpaper was peeling near the ceiling, and the radiator clanked through the night like it was trying to start a conversation. But it was hers, the only space in the world that belonged to her. She sat cross-legged on the narrow bed, her phone clutched in one hand, staring at the photo of Liam's bent knee until the screen went dark. What if someone doesn't want them to move? The thought had been circling her mind for days, growing sharper with each pass. It sounded paranoid, ridiculous even. Who would do something like that? Who would keep 3 little boys trapped in their own bodies? But then she thought about Margaret's smile, the way it never quite reached her eyes, the way she'd appeared in the restaurant hallway like she'd been waiting, watching, and that note. Do not engage with them further. Samantha set the phone down and rubbed her temples. She needed proof, real proof, something more than a gut feeling and a blurry photo. She needed to dig deeper the next morning. Samantha showed up for her shift at Giuseppe's an hour early. The Kuka woman named Rosa, who'd worked there longer than anyone could remember, was the only one in the kitchen, prepping vegetables for the lunch rush. You're here early, Rosa said without looking up from the cutting board. Couldn't sleep, Samantha said, leaning against the counter. Hey, can I ask you something? Rosa raised an eyebrow. Depends on what it is. You know the Collins family, right? The ones with the triplets? Rosa's hand stilled. What about them? Do they come in often? Used to, Rosa said slowly. Before the accident, Samantha frowned. Accident. Rosa set down her knife and wiped her hands on her apron. The wife, Nathan's wife, she died a few years back. Car crash, I think. After that, Nathan stopped coming around for a while. When he finally showed up again, he had those boys with him, and that, she paused, choosing her words carefully. That woman, Margaret. Rosa nodded. Yeah, her. Don't like her much. Why not? Rosa shrugged. Just a feeling. Something about the way she looks at people. Like she's always calculating. Samantha chewed her lip. Do you know anything about their medical stuff? The boys, not much, Rosa admitted, but I heard Nathan talking to the manager once. Said the doctors told him the boys would never walk. Some kind of nerve damage or something. She paused. Why are you asking? Samantha hesitated. Then decided honesty was worth the risk. I think something's wrong. I think maybe they can move, but someone doesn't want anyone to know. Rosa stared at her for a long moment. Then she turned back to the cutting board. Be careful, Mija. People with money don't like it when you poke around in their business. I know. I mean it, Rosa said, her voice low. You start asking questions. You might not like the answers. Samantha spent the rest of the day thinking about what Rosa had said, but she couldn't let it go. Not when she kept seeing Liam's hand reaching for hers, Caleb's knees shifting, Ethan's almost smile. So that night, after her shift ended, she did something she probably shouldn't have. She went through the trash. The restaurant kept all its recycling and waste bins in the alley out back. It wasn't glamorous, but Samantha had taken out enough garbage over the years to know the routine. The Collins family had been in earlier that week. Nathan always ordered the same thing, and the staff always threw away the leftovers in the same bin. Samantha pulled on a pair of dishwashing gloves and started digging. She found it 20 minutes later, wedged between a soggy napkin and an empty ketchup bottle. A crumpled piece of paper. She smoothed it out carefully. Her heart pounding. It was a drawing crayon on the back of a kid's menu. 3 stick figures lying in a bed. Side by side above them, a larger figure with long hair and a big, round shape in her hand. A spoon, maybe. And falling from the sky or the ceiling, it was hard to tell, were blue dots, rain, tears. Samantha turned the paper over. On the other side, in shaky handwriting that could only belong to a child, were 2 words, help us. Her hand shook. She folded the paper carefully and tucked it into her pocket. The next breakthrough came from Rosa. Samantha was refilling the coffee station when Rosa appeared beside her. A book tucked under one arm. Found something, Rosa said quietly. Samantha glanced around. The restaurant was mostly empty, but she kept her voice low anyway. What is it? Rosa pulled the book out. An old, worn cookbook with a faded cover. This was in the break room. Someone left it years ago. I was going through it last night and found this. She opened the book to a page near the middle. Tucked between recipes for lasagna and pot roast was a letter. The paper was thin, yellowed with age, and covered in neat, looping handwriting. Samantha took it carefully, her eyes scanning the words. Nathan, if you're reading this, something has happened to me. I don't want to think about it, but I have to be realistic. The boys are so small, so vulnerable, and I need you to promise me something. Don't let anyone turn them into trophies for their own guilt. Don't let doctors poke and prod them just to make you feel like you're doing something. And please, please don't let fear win. They're scared, Nathan, not broken. Scared, I see it in their eyes every time someone talks about what they can't do instead of what they can. I see it in the way they freeze up when strangers hover over them with clipboards and sad smiles. If something happens to me, don't let them become prisoners in their own home. They need air. They need life. They need you to believe in them even when it's hard, especially when it's hard. I love you. I love them. Don't forget that. Samantha read it twice. Then, a third time, her throat tightened. Claire was his wife, Rosa said softly. She used to come in here all the time. Sweet woman, always smiling. She paused. She left this here a few months before she died. I think she knew something was going to happen. Samantha's hands trembled as she held the letter. Does Nathan know about this? Rosa shook her head. I don't think so. She must have hidden it here and forgot to tell him. Samantha folded the letter carefully and slipped it into her apron pocket. Right next to the drawing. Can I keep this? Rosa hesitated, then nodded. Just be smart about it. That night, Samantha sat on her bed and laid everything out in front of her. The photo of Liam's bent knee, the drawing with the blue dots and the plea for help. The letter from Claire, 3 pieces of a puzzle she didn't fully understand yet. But one thing was clear, the boys weren't paralyzed, or if they were, it wasn't the kind of paralysis the doctors claimed. They're scared. Nathan, not broken, scared. Samantha thought about Margaret, about the note she'd sent, about the way she controlled every aspect of the boys' lives. And then she thought about the new medication Margaret had mentioned. She pulled out her phone and started searching again. This time, she wasn't looking for general anxiety medications. She was looking for something specific. It took an hour, but she finally found it. A forum post from a parent whose child had been prescribed something called clonazepam for muscle spasms. The parent had stopped giving it after noticing their child became lethargic and unresponsive. Samantha's stomach dropped. She thought about the crumpled scrap of paper she'd found in the trash weeks ago. The one with the torn label, Cialpam clonazepam. It wasn't a treatment, it was a sedative. and someone was giving it to 3 7-year-old boys. Samantha didn't sleep that night. She lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, her mind racing. She had to tell Nathan, had to show him the letter, the drawing, the evidence. But what if he didn't believe her? What if Margaret convinced him she was just some desperate server looking for attention, or worse? Money, what if she was wrong? No, she wasn't wrong. She knew it in her bones. Those boys could move. They could reach. They could try. And someone was keeping them sedated to hide it. The question was, why? Samantha spent 3 days rehearsing what she'd say to Nathan. She practiced in the mirror while getting ready for work, whispered the words under her breath while folding laundry at the laundromat, ran through every possible reaction he might have: anger, disbelief, gratitude, suspicion. But no amount of rehearsal could prepare her for what actually happened. The opportunity came during another charity event at the Collins estate. This one was bigger, more guests, more staff, more noise. Samantha had been assigned to work the main ballroom, where crystal chandeliers hung from vaulted ceilings and champagne flowed like water. She'd tucked Claire's letter into the inner pocket of her vest, folded carefully and wrapped in a plastic sandwich bag to protect it. The drawing from Ethan was there too, along with a printout of the forum post about clonazepam that she'd found online. Her plan was simple: find a quiet moment, pull Nathan aside, and show him everything simple. Except nothing about that night turned out to be simple. She spotted Nathan early in the evening, standing near the bar with a tumbler of whiskey. He wasn't drinking. He looked like he'd rather be anywhere else. His tie was already loosened, and his eyes kept drifting toward the doorway like he was calculating the fastest escape route. Samantha waited until the crowd thinned slightly, then made her move. "Mr. Collins," he turned, surprised. "Samantha, I didn't know you were working tonight. Last-minute call," she said, trying to keep her voice steady. "Can I talk to you for a second?" "It's important," Nathan frowned. "Is everything okay?" She glanced around, making sure no one was close enough to overhear. "I need to show you something about the boys." His expression shifted, guarded now. Wary. "What about them?" Samantha reached into her vest pocket, her fingers brushing the edge of the plastic-wrapped letter. And that's when Margaret appeared. She materialized out of the crowd like smoke, her silver hair gleaming under the chandelier light. She wore a black cocktail dress that probably cost more than Samantha's rent for 6 months, and her smile was sharp enough to cut glass. "Samantha," Margaret said smoothly. "I didn't expect to see you here." Samantha's hand froze. "I'm working the event, of course." Margaret's gaze flicked to Nathan, then back to Samantha. "Mr. Collins, I hope she's not bothering you." "She's not." Nathan started, "because I know how some people can be." Margaret continued, her tone light but pointed, always looking for an opportunity. "Especially when money's involved." Samantha felt the words like a slap. "I'm not looking for money." Margaret's smile didn't waver. "I'm sure you're not, but it's important to maintain boundaries. Don't you think, Mr. Collins has been through enough without being—" She paused delicately, taken advantage of. Nathan shifted uncomfortably. "Margaret, I don't think." "It's fine," Samantha said quickly, her face burning. She pulled her hand out of her pocket, empty. "I was just checking if he needed anything." "Excuse me." She turned and walked away before Nathan could respond, her heart hammering against her ribs. Behind her, she heard Margaret's voice, low and soothing. "You have to be careful, Nathan. People see vulnerability and they pounce. It's not personal." "It's just how the world works." Samantha spent the rest of the evening in a fog. She circulated with trays of canapes and forced smiles, but her mind was elsewhere, on the letter in her pocket, on Margaret's razor-sharp words, on the way Nathan had looked at her, not with suspicion, exactly, but with doubt. She'd lost her chance, and then things got worse. It happened near the end of the night, when most of the guests had migrated to the patio for after-dinner drinks. Samantha was clearing glasses from a corner table when she heard her name. "Samantha Parker." She turned. A man in a dark suit stood behind her. He was tall, broad-shouldered, with a kind of blank expression that screamed private security. "Yes," she said cautiously. "Ms. Wallace would like a word." Samantha's stomach dropped. "I'm working now. Please." It wasn't a request. Margaret was waiting in a small sitting room off the main hallway. She stood by the window, her back to the door, her silhouette framed by the glow of the garden lights outside. "Close the door," she said, without turning around. Samantha hesitated, then did as she was told. Margaret turned slowly, her expression unreadable. "I want to be very clear with you." "Samantha, I don't appreciate what you're trying to do." "I'm not trying to do anything," Samantha said, her voice steadier than she felt. "Don't insult my intelligence." Margaret's tone was soft, almost gentle, which somehow made it worse. You've been hovering around those boys for weeks, playing your little games, asking questions, and now you're trying to get to Nathan. I care about them. Samantha said, That's all. Margaret tilted her head, studying her. Do you, or do you see an opportunity? What, a wealthy widower? 3 disabled children, a tragic story. Margaret's smile returned, cold and clinical. It's a compelling narrative, isn't it? The poor waitress who swoops in to save the day, very Cinderella. Samantha's hands clenched into fists. You don't know what you're talking about. I know exactly what I'm talking about. Margaret stepped closer. I've seen women like you before, desperate, grasping, willing to say or do anything to climb a ladder that was never meant for them. I'm not, you're fired. The words landed like a punch to the gut. Samantha stared. What? The restaurant manager is a friend of mine. Margaret said calmly, I've already spoken to her. Your employment is terminated. Effective immediately. You can't. I can, and I have. Margaret crossed her arms. You're also banned from this property. If you attempt to contact Mr. Collins or his sons again, I will have you arrested for harassment. Samantha's vision blurred. She wanted to scream, to throw something, to tell Margaret exactly what she thought of her and her threats. But the words stuck in her throat because Margaret had won, and they both knew it. 2 security guards escorted Samantha out through the side entrance. Not roughly, nothing that would cause a scene, but firmly enough that everyone who saw them understood what was happening. She was being removed. Like trash, the walk from the sitting room to the service exit felt endless. Samantha kept her eyes down, her face burning. As staff members she'd worked with for years watched her pass. Some looked away, others whispered. No one helped. When they reached the door, one of the guards handed her a plastic bag. Inside was her apron, her name tag, and the contents of her locker from the restaurant. Don't come back, he said flatly, and then she was outside, standing alone in the dark. The bus ride back to the boarding house was a blur. Samantha sat in the back, clutching the plastic bag in her lap, staring at nothing. She'd been humiliated. Before, working in the service industry meant developing a thick skin, but this was different. This was deliberate, personal, cruel, and the worst part, she'd failed. She'd had proof in her pocket, Claire's letter, Ethan's drawing, the research on Clonazepam, and she hadn't been able to show any of it to Nathan. Margaret had made sure of that. When she finally got home, Samantha dropped the plastic bag on the floor and collapsed onto her bed. The room felt smaller than usual, colder. She pulled out her phone and looked at the photo of Liam's bent knee one more time. Then she opened her messages and typed out a text to Nathan's number, the one she'd gotten from the restaurant's contact list months ago. I know you probably won't believe me, but your boys can move. Someone is keeping them sedated. Please look into it, please. Her thumb hovered over the send button. Then she deleted it. What was the point? Margaret had already poisoned the well. Nathan would never believe her now. Samantha set the phone down and stared at the ceiling. For the first time since her grandmother died, she felt completely, utterly alone. But in the pocket of her vest, still draped over the chair by the door, Claire's letter waited. And somewhere across town, 3 little boys slept in their beds, their legs still and their minds clouded, waiting for someone to see them. Really see them, 3 days after the humiliation at the Collins estate. Samantha still hadn't left her room. She told herself she was job hunting, scrolling through listings on her cracked phone screen, filling out applications that would probably go nowhere. But mostly, she just lay on her bed and stared at the water stain on the ceiling that looked like a bird with broken wings. The landlord had slipped a notice under her door that morning. Rent was overdue. Again, she had until the end of the week to pay up or get out. Samantha crumpled the notice and tossed it toward the trash can. It missed. Everything missed lately. Her phone buzzed. A text from Rosa. You okay, Mia? Samantha typed back, yeah, just figuring things out. It was a lie. She wasn't figuring anything out. She was drowning. Another buzz. Come by the restaurant if you need to talk. I saved you some lasagna. Samantha smiled despite herself. Rosa had always been kind to her, one of the few people in this city who treated her like she mattered. Thanks, I'll try. She set the phone down and forced herself to sit up. The plastic bag from the estate was still on the floor where she'd dropped it. She hadn't touched it since that night. Now she reached for it. Inside were her apron, her name tag, a pack of gum, and a hair tie. Nothing valuable. Nothing worth keeping, really. She was about to toss the whole thing in the trash when something fell out. A shoe, small, child-sized. Navy blue with Velcro straps. Samantha picked it up slowly, turning it over in her hands. It was worn, scuffed around the toe. The sole flattened on one side, but it was the laces that caught her attention. One side was frayed and dirty, like it had been dragged across the ground repeatedly, but the other side was almost pristine. Samantha frowned. If the shoe had been dragged, if the boy wearing it couldn't move his legs, both sides would show the same wear. The whole sole would be scraped evenly, but this shoe wasn't evenly worn. It was worn on one side because someone had been trying to use it, trying to push, trying to step. Her heart started to race. She grabbed her phone and called Rosa. "Hey, Mia." Rosa answered. "You coming by, Rosa? The Collins family, do they still come to the restaurant?" There was a pause. "Not since you got fired." "Why do you remember if they ever left anything behind? Toys, shoes, anything like that?" "I don't think so," Rosa said slowly, "but wait. There was something a few weeks ago. One of the busboys found a shoe in the private dining room. He put it in the lost and found, but no one ever claimed it." Samantha's grip tightened on the phone. "Is it still there?" "Probably. We don't clean out the lost and found that often." "You want me to check, please?" Samantha heard shuffling on the other end of the line. Then, Rosa's voice calling out to someone in the kitchen. A minute later, she came back. "Yeah, it's here, little blue shoe. Velcro straps. Can you take a picture of it?" "The sole, specifically." Sure, hold on." Samantha waited, her pulse hammering in her ears. Her phone buzzed. A photo appeared. The shoe in the picture was identical to the one she was holding. Same brand, same size, same navy blue, and the sole showed the exact same pattern of wear heavier on one side, lighter on the other. "Rosa," Samantha said quietly, "where exactly did the busboy find it?" "Under the couch in the private dining room." "Why? What's going on?" Samantha stared at the shoe in her hand. Under the couch, in the private dining room, where she'd played the bottle cap game with the boys. The shoe had come off during the game because Liam or Caleb, or Ethan, had been moving their foot, and no one had noticed, no one except her that night. Samantha couldn't sleep. She sat at the tiny desk in her room, the shoe in front of her, and started piecing things together. The shoe proved the boys were moving, or at least trying to move. But on its own, it wasn't enough. Margaret could explain it away, say the shoe slipped off, say it had been worn unevenly before the boys stopped walking. Samantha needed more. She pulled out her phone and opened the photo she'd taken weeks ago, the one of the boys playing with the bottle caps. She zoomed in on Liam's leg, on the faint outline of his bent knee beneath the blanket. Then she opened her browser and typed, "Collins's state security cameras." Nothing useful came up. She tried again, "Charity event Collins Estate." A few photos from local news sites appeared, wide shots of the ballroom, guests in evening wear. Nathan shaking hands with donors, and then, buried on page 3 of the search results, she found it, a blog post from a local event photographer. The post included a gallery of candid shots from the charity event. Most were standard people laughing, holding champagne glasses, posing for the camera. But one photo made Samantha's breath catch. It was a shot of the patio, taken from an angle that showed the string lights overhead and the edge of the lawn, and there, in the background, barely visible but unmistakable, were the boys, in their stroller, with Samantha crouched beside them. And Liam's foot was resting on one of the chalk rectangles she'd drawn. Not lying limp, not hanging loose, resting deliberately like he was trying to touch it. Samantha's hands shook as she screenshotted the photo and zoomed in. It wasn't perfect, the resolution was low, and the angle made it hard to see details, but it was something, another piece of the puzzle. The next morning, Samantha went back to Giuseppe's. Rosa met her at the back door and pulled her into a quick, tight hug. "You look terrible, Mia." "Thanks," Samantha said dryly. Rosa led her into the kitchen and handed her a Tupperware container. "Lasagna, still warm. Eat." Samantha set the container aside. "I need your help." Rosa raised an eyebrow. "With what?" Samantha pulled out her phone and showed her the photo from the event photographer's blog. "Look at this. Look at Liam's foot." Rosa squinted at the screen. "Okay, he's touching the chalk." On purpose, Rosa looked closer. Then her eyes widened. "Dios mio." "I think the boys can move," Samantha said. Or at least they could before Margaret started giving them that medication, but every time they make progress, someone covers it up. "Margaret," Rosa said flatly. "Yeah." Rosa set the phone down and crossed her arms. "So what are you going to do?" "I don't know," Samantha admitted. "I tried talking to Nathan, but Margaret shut me down. She got me fired, banned me from the property. If I go anywhere near them again, she'll have me arrested, so don't go near them." Rosa said, "Go around them." Samantha frowned. "What do you mean?" Rosa leaned against the counter, her expression thoughtful. "You said the estate has security cameras." "Right, yeah, lots of them. So there's footage, video, proof." If you can get your hands on it, I can't," Samantha interrupted. "I don't have access to the estate anymore, and even if I did, Margaret probably controls all of that." Rosa smiled. "But you know someone who does have access." Samantha stared at her. "Who?" "Maria, one of the housekeepers. She's my cousin. Works there 3 times a week." Hope flickered in Samantha's chest. "Do you think she'd help?" "Maybe," Rosa said, "if you ask nicely, and if you promise not to get her in trouble." 2 days later, Samantha met Maria in a coffee shop downtown. Maria was in her 50s, with kind eyes and calloused hands. She looked tired, the kind of tired that came from years of scrubbing other people's floors and biting your tongue when they treated you like furniture. "Rosa says you need help," Maria said, stirring sugar into her coffee. "I do," Samantha said. "But I don't want to put you in a bad position." Maria gave her a long look. "Those boys, the triplets, you care about them, yes, and you think something bad is happening to them." "I know it is," Maria nodded slowly. "Okay, what do you need?" Samantha leaned forward. "The security cameras on the patio." "Do you know if these keep old footage?" "They keep everything," Maria said. "Miss Wallace is very particular about security. She reviews the footage herself sometimes." "Can you get me access to it?" Maria's eyes widened. "You want me to steal security footage?" "Not steal," Samantha said quickly. "Just look at it. See if there's anything from the charity event a few weeks ago. Specifically, anything showing me with the boys on the patio." Maria was quiet for a long moment. Then she sighed. "If I get caught, you won't," Samantha said. "I promise." Maria didn't look convinced, but she nodded anyway. "I'll try." 4 days passed with no word from Maria. Samantha tried not to think about all the ways this could go wrong. Maria getting caught, Margaret finding out, the footage being deleted before anyone could see it. She tried not to think about the eviction notice taped to her door, or the fact that she had exactly $12 in her checking account, or the way the boarding house landlord looked at her now like she was a problem waiting to be solved. Mostly, she failed. On the 5th day, her phone buzzed. "Come to the coffee shop. Same place, 1 hour." Samantha was out the door in 30 seconds. Maria was already there when Samantha arrived, sitting in the same corner booth with a cup of coffee she wasn't drinking. She looked nervous, her fingers drummed against the table, and her eyes kept flicking toward the door. Samantha slid into the seat across from her. "Did you find something?" Maria didn't answer right away. Instead, she reached into her purse and pulled out a small USB drive. Samantha's heart stopped. "I can't believe I did this," Maria muttered, sliding the drive across the table. "If Ms. Wallace finds out." "She won't," Samantha said quickly, pocketing the drive. "I promise." "What's on it?" "Footage from the patio cameras," Maria said, "from the night of the charity event. I went through hours of it. Most of it's just guests standing around talking, drinking, but there's one clip." She trailed off, shaking her head. "You need to see it yourself." "How did you get it without anyone noticing?" Maria's mouth twitched into something that wasn't quite a smile. "Ms. Wallace thinks the cameras are always recording, but the housekeeper before me showed me how to access the system. She said it was important to know, in case something ever happened and we needed proof." She paused. "I copied the file to the drive and deleted the download history, as far as anyone knows. No one's touched that footage." Samantha reached across the table and squeezed Maria's hand. "Thank you. Seriously, thank you." Maria pulled her hand back, her expression tight. "Just be careful, Miss. Wallace is dangerous. I don't know what she's doing to those boys, but I know she'll do whatever it takes to keep it hidden." Samantha didn't go home. Instead, she went to the public library, a squat brick building, 3 blocks from the boarding house that smelled like old books and burnt coffee. She checked in at the front desk, signed up for a computer, and sat down in the farthest corner of the room. Her hands shook as she plugged in the USB drive. The file loaded slowly. _video labeled patio_cam_3_042 to 2200. MP4. Samantha clicked play. The footage was grainy, shot from a high angle that captured most of the patio and part of the lawn. The timestamp in the corner read 7:0 p.m. Samantha fast-forwarded through the first hour. Guests arrived, mingled, drank champagne. The jazz quartet played in the corner. Everything looked normal. At 7:47 p.m., Nathan appeared on screen, standing near the edge of the patio with a tumbler in his hand. He looked exhausted, even in the low-resolution footage. And then, at 8:03 p.m., Samantha saw herself. She watched as her past self crossed the patio, tray in hand, and made her way toward the triplets' stroller. Watched as she crouched down and pulled out the piece of chalk. Watched as she started drawing on the stone. The boys weren't visible from this angle. The stroller blocked them, but Samantha could see her own face, the way she smiled, the way her hands moved. Slow and careful as she drew the rectangles, and then at 8:11 p.m. it happened. The stroller shifted slightly. It was barely noticeable, just a faint rocking motion like something inside had moved. Samantha leaned closer to the screen, her pulse pounding in her ears. She rewound the footage and watched it again. There, at exactly 81,122, the stroller rocked, and just for a second, less than a second, a small foot appeared at the edge of the frame. Liam's foot. It was angled down, toes pointed, like he was trying to reach for something, trying to touch the chalk rectangle. Samantha's breath caught. She paused the video and stared at the frozen image. The foot was blurry, pixelated, but it was there, undeniable, proof. But she needed more. She kept watching. At 8:14 p.m., Margaret entered the frame. Samantha watched as Margaret crossed the patio with that same smooth, controlled walk. Watched as she stopped beside the stroller and said something. Her lips moved. But there was no audio, and then Margaret looked directly at the camera. It was only for a second, just a quick glance upward, like she was checking to make sure it was recording or making sure it wasn't. Samantha's stomach twisted. Margaret knew about the cameras. Of course she did. She probably reviewed the footage herself. Just like Maria had said, which meant she'd seen this, seen Liam's foot moving, seen the boys responding to Samantha, and she'd done nothing. No worse than nothing. She'd fired Samantha, banned her from the estate, made sure no one would believe her if she tried to speak up, because Margaret didn't want anyone to know the boys could move. Samantha kept watching. At 8:16 p.m., Margaret bent down and adjusted something on the stroller, probably one of the blankets. Her body blocked the camera's view for a moment, and when she straightened up, the stroller was still again, completely still, like whatever small movement the boys had been making had stopped. Samantha rewound the footage and watched it 3 more times, her chest tightening with each replay. Margaret had sedated them, right there, in the middle of the party, with dozens of guests nearby. She'd probably slipped something into their drinks or given them a dose of medication disguised as comfort. And no one had noticed. No one except Samantha. She kept scrolling through the footage. At 8:32 p.m., Margaret wheeled the stroller off screen. At 8:41 p.m., Samantha appeared again, this time being escorted out by security. The video ended at 10:00 p.m., when the last of the guests left and the patio lights went dark. Samantha sat back in her chair, her mind racing. She had the proof. She had the letter from Claire, the drawing from Ethan, the research on clonazepam, the worn shoe, the photo from the event photographer's blog. And now she had this, 10 seconds of footage that showed exactly what she'd been saying all along. The boys could move, and someone was stopping them. Samantha ejected the USB drive and slipped it into her pocket. Then she opened a new browser window and typed in Nathan Collins's office address. It took less than a minute to find his company had a website with a sleek contact page and a photo of him shaking hands with some politician. She wrote down the address on a scrap of paper. Then she left the library and started walking. The office building was downtown, glass and steel and intimidatingly tall. Samantha stood on the sidewalk across the street, staring up at it, and felt very small. What was she doing? Nathan had already doubted her once. Margaret had already painted her as desperate, opportunistic, money-hungry. What if he didn't believe her this time either? What if he called security and had her thrown out before she even got to show him the footage? Samantha took a deep breath. She thought about Liam's hand reaching for hers in the restaurant, about Caleb's fingers stretching toward the bottle cap, about Ethan's almost smile. She thought about Claire's letter. They're scared. Nathan, not broken, scared. And she thought about her grandmother, washing other people's clothes with cracked, bleeding hands, never complaining, never giving up. You hold your head up, Mia, always. Samantha crossed the street. The lobby was all marble floors and potted plants that probably cost more than her rent. A receptionist sat behind a sleek desk, typing on a computer with perfectly manicured nails. Samantha approached slowly, her sneakers squeaking on the polished floor. "Can I help you?" the receptionist asked without looking up. "I need to see Nathan Collins." Now the receptionist looked up. Her gaze swept over Samantha, the worn jeans, the faded jacket, the scuffed sneakers, and her expression shifted, polite but dismissive. "Do you have an appointment?" "No, but, Mr. Collins doesn't take walk-ins. It's about his sons," Samantha said. "It's urgent." The receptionist's smile tightened. "I'm sure it is. But without an appointment, please, Samantha leaned forward, her voice low and desperate. Just tell him Samantha Parker's here. Tell him I have proof. He'll understand. The receptionist hesitated. Then she picked up the phone. 5 minutes later, Nathan Collins stepped out of the elevator. He looked different than he had at the charity event. More put together, more guarded. His tie was straight, his jaw set, but his eyes were the same, tired, heavy, like he was carrying the weight of the world on his shoulders. Samantha, he said quietly, what are you doing here? She pulled the USB drive out of her pocket and held it up. I need you to watch something. Nathan stared at the USB drive, like it might explode. What is this? He asked. Security footage, Samantha said, from your estate. From the night of the charity event. His jaw tightened. How did you? It doesn't matter how I got it. She took a breath, steadying herself. What matters is what's on it, please. Just watch it. For a long moment, Nathan didn't move. He stood there in the middle of the lobby, his eyes flicking between Samantha and the drive in her hand, like he was trying to decide whether to trust her or call security. Finally, he nodded. Upstairs. My office, Nathan's office, was on the 23rd floor corner suite. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city. The desk was massive, dark wood polished to a mirror shine. Everything about the room screamed power and control, but Nathan looked small in it. He gestured for Samantha to sit, then took the USB drive and plugged it into his laptop. The screen flickered to life, showing the grainy patio footage. Samantha sat on the edge of the leather chair, her hands clenched in her lap, and waited. Nathan hit play. She'd already watched the footage a dozen times, but seeing it again, watching Nathan's face as he saw it for the first time, made her chest ache. At first, he just looked confused. He frowned at the screen, watching the guests mill around, watching himself appear with a tumbler of whiskey. But when Samantha appeared on screen, when she crouched beside the stroller and started drawing with chalk, his expression changed. He leaned forward, and when the stroller rocked, when Liam's foot appeared at the edge of the frame, toes pointed, reaching, Nathan's hands clenched into fists on the desk. Go back, he said, his voice rough. Samantha reached over and dragged the playback slider back 10 seconds. They watched it again, the stroller rocking, the small foot stretching. The deliberate movement, Nathan's breath came faster. Keep going, he said. The footage continued. Margaret appeared, looked at the camera, bent down and adjusted the blanket, and then the stroller went still. Nathan watched in silence, his face pale, his knuckles white where they gripped the edge of the desk. When the video ended, he didn't move. Samantha pulled out the plastic-wrapped letter and set it on the desk. This is from your wife, Claire. She left it at the restaurant before she died. Nathan's eyes snapped to the letter. He picked it up slowly, his hands shaking, and unfolded it. Samantha watched as he read, watched as his face crumpled, watched as his shoulders started to shake. They're scared, he whispered, not broken. Scared, yeah, Samantha said quietly. Nathan set the letter down and pressed his palms against his eyes. For a moment, he just sat there, breathing hard, trying to hold himself together. Then he dropped his hands and looked at Samantha. What else do you have? She pulled out the drawing, the research on clonazepam, the photo from the event photographer's blog, the worn shoe. She laid it all out on the desk like evidence at a trial. Nathan stared at it, all of it, and then he stood. I need to go home, he said. The drive to the estate was silent. Nathan gripped the steering wheel so hard his knuckles turned white. Samantha sat in the passenger seat, her heart pounding, wondering if she'd just made the biggest mistake of her life. What if Margaret had already destroyed the other evidence? What if she convinced Nathan this was all a misunderstanding? What if, thank you, Nathan said suddenly. Samantha blinked. What, for not giving up? His voice cracked. For caring about them when He trailed off, shaking his head. I should have seen it. I should have known. You were grieving, Samantha said gently. And she's good at what she does. Nathan's jaw tightened. Too good. The estate looked different in the daylight. Less grand, more like a prison. Nathan parked in the circular driveway and got out without a word. Samantha followed, her stomach churning. They found Margaret in the library. She was sitting in a high-backed chair near the window, a cup of tea on the side table, reading a book like she didn't have a care in the world. When Nathan walked in, she looked up and smiled. Nathan, I didn't expect you home so early. Where are the boys? He asked. Upstairs, resting. Margaret set the book down, her smile faltering slightly when she saw Samantha. What is she doing here? I thought I made it clear. Where's Drive? Bennett, Nathan interrupted. Margaret blinked. I'm sorry, Dr. Bennett. Call him. Tell him to come here. Now. Margaret stood slowly, her expression shifting from confusion to something harder. Nathan. What's going on? Nathan pulled out his phone and held it up. the paused security footage visible on the screen. This is what's going on. Margaret's face went very still for a long moment. No one spoke. Then Margaret laughed. It was a soft, disbelieving sound. You can't be serious. Call him, Nathan said again. His voice was low, dangerous now. Margaret's smile vanished. Nathan, I don't know what she's told you, but I've seen the footage. Margaret, I've read my wife's letter. I know about the clonazepam. The color drained from Margaret's face. You've been sedating them. Nathan continued, his voice shaking now. You've been keeping them drugged so they can't move. So no one would know they could move. That's absurd, Margaret said. But her voice lacked conviction. Nathan stepped closer. Why, he shouted. And Samantha flinched at the raw pain in his voice. They're children. They're my children. Why would you do this to them? Margaret's composure cracked. Her hands trembled. Her eyes darted toward the door like she was calculating an escape. You don't understand, she said quietly. Then make me understand. Margaret sank back into the chair, her face pale. For a moment she looked older, fragile. I lost my daughter, she said finally, 10 years ago. She was 7, same age as your boys. Nathan's expression didn't soften. That doesn't explain. She drowned, Margaret continued, her voice hollow. I was supposed to be watching her, but I looked away just for a second and she trailed off, swallowing hard. The doctor said if I'd noticed sooner, if I'd acted faster, she might have survived. But I didn't. I failed her. Samantha felt a flicker of something almost like sympathy. Almost, your boys, Margaret said, looking at Nathan when Claire died. And you brought them to me, so fragile, so scared, I thought. I thought if I could keep them safe, if I could control everything, make sure nothing bad happened to him, then maybe I could make up for what I'd done, for failing my own daughter, by drugging him. Nathan's voice was ice, by protecting them. Margaret shot back. Do you know what the world does to children like that? Children who are different. They get stared at, pitied, used. I was keeping them safe. You were keeping them prisoners, Samantha said. Margaret's gaze snapped to her, sharp and venomous. You have no idea what you're talking about. I know what I saw, Samantha said. I know they can move. I know they were trying. And you stopped them. I was following Dr. Bennett's orders, Margaret said. Bullshit, Nathan said flatly. Call him right now. Drive. Charles Bennett arrived 20 minutes later. He was a small man with thinning hair and wire-rimmed glasses, the kind of person who blended into the background. He walked into the library with a calm, professional smile that faltered the moment he saw Nathan's expression. Mr. Collins, he said cautiously. Margaret said it was urgent. Nathan didn't waste time. He held up his phone again, showing the footage. Explain this, doctor. Bennett adjusted his glasses and squinted at the screen. His face went pale. I don't. Those are my sons, Nathan said, moving, trying to walk. And according to you, they're completely paralyzed. Doctor. Bennett opened his mouth, closed it, opened it again. There must be some mistake, he stammered. The only mistake, Nathan said, his voice dangerously calm, was trusting you. Margaret stood. Charles, just tell him the truth, doctor. Bennett shot her a panicked look. Margaret, tell him about the treatment plan, the medications, the commissions. Nathan's eyes narrowed. Commissions. And just like that, the whole thing unraveled. It came out in pieces, halting, desperate, ugly. The treatment plan that wasn't a treatment plan. The medications prescribed not to help, but to sedate, to keep the boys dependent, to keep them coming back for appointments, for tests, for therapies that did nothing except generate billable hours. Dr. Bennett had been getting kickbacks from the pharmaceutical companies. Margaret had been receiving a percentage for managing the boys' care. The more helpless the boys seemed, the more money everyone made, and Nathan, grieving, desperate, willing to do anything to help his sons, had been funding it all when Dr. Bennett finally stopped talking. His face was slick with sweat. Nathan stood very still. Then he pulled out his phone and dialed. Yes, he said when someone answered. I need to report medical fraud. The police arrived an hour later. Samantha watched from the hallway as Margaret and Dr. Bennett were let out in handcuffs. Margaret didn't look at Nathan, didn't look at anyone. She just stared straight ahead, her face blank. Dr. Bennett tried to explain, tried to justify, but no one was listening. When the door closed behind them, the house fell silent. Nathan stood in the foyer, his shoulders slumped, staring at the empty space where they'd been. I'm sorry, Samantha said quietly. He shook his head. Don't be. You saved them. We're not done yet, she said. Nathan looked at her. What do you mean? She smiled. Now we teach them to walk. The new doctor arrived 3 days later. Her name was Dr. Elena Reyes. and she was nothing like Dr. Bennett. She was younger, maybe 40, with kind eyes and calloused hands that suggested she actually worked with her patients, instead of just prescribing pills from behind a desk. Nathan had found her through a colleague who specialized in pediatric rehabilitation. She came highly recommended, with a philosophy that focused on movement through play rather than clinical intervention. Samantha liked her immediately. "Show me what you've been doing, doctor," Reyes said, setting her bag down in the sunroom where the boys spent most of their time. Samantha pulled out a roll of colored masking tape from her pocket. She'd bought it with the last of her money 2 days ago and started laying strips across the hardwood floor. "Trails," she explained. "Different colors mean different things. Red is hot lava, blue is water, green is safe. The goal is to get from one end of the room to the other without touching the wrong color, doctor." Reyes crouched down, studying the pattern. "And they respond to this. They did before," Samantha said quietly. "Before the medication." Dr. Reyes nodded. "The clonazepam should be out of their systems by now. It's been 72 hours since the last dose." She looked at the triplets, who were sitting on a padded mat nearby, watching with cautious interest. "Let's see what happens." At first, nothing did. Liam stared at the colored tape like he didn't know what to make of it. Caleb's fingers twitched, but he didn't reach out. Ethan's eyes tracked the pattern, but his body stayed still. Samantha's heart sank. What if she'd been wrong? What if the movement she'd seen before had been nothing more than involuntary twitches? What if? And then Liam's hand moved, slowly, shakily, but deliberately. He reached forward and touched the green tape. Samantha's breath caught. "Good, doctor," Reyes said softly. "That's good, Liam. Can you do it again?" Liam's fingers pressed against the tape. Then, with visible effort, he slid his hand forward, an inch, then 2. Samantha wanted to cheer, wanted to scoop him up and spin him around, but she stayed quiet, stayed still, letting him work at his own pace. Caleb was next. He leaned forward just a little and his shoulder shifted, his arm extended. His hand landed on the blue tape. "Oops," Samantha said lightly. "That's water." "You got wet." Caleb's mouth twitched, almost a smile. He pulled his hand back and reached again, this time landing on green. "Perfect," Samantha whispered. Ethan watched his brothers. Then, so carefully it almost hurt to watch. He stretched his leg. It barely moved, maybe an inch, but it moved, doctor. Reyes wrote something in her notebook. "How long have they been like this?" "Unable to move since their mother died," Nathan said from the doorway. His voice was rough. 3 years, and before that, Nathan hesitated. They were delayed. Cautious, the doctors said it was trauma, that they'd seen the accident. He swallowed hard. Claire's car went off a bridge. The boys were in the back seat. They survived, but she... He didn't finish. Dr. Reyes nodded slowly. "Trauma can manifest physically, especially in children. It's possible they shut down as a protective mechanism. So, this isn't permanent?" Nathan asked. And the hope in his voice was almost painful to hear. "I don't know yet, doctor," Reyes said honestly. "But I think we can help them." The session started the next day, doctor. Reyes came every morning at 9, armed with foam mats, resistance bands, and an endless supply of patience. Samantha assisted. Following Dr. Reyes's lead, learning as she went, they started small. Pillows became mountains to climb over. Pots and pans became drums to beat in rhythm, encouraging the boys to move their arms in time. The colored tape trails got longer, more complex. Liam was the most responsive. He'd reach for things now without being prompted. His movements still shaky, but growing stronger every day. Caleb was quieter, more methodical. He'd watch what Liam did, then try to replicate it. Slower, more careful, but no less determined, Ethan struggled the most. His body seemed to fight him at every turn, muscles stiff from years of disuse. But he kept trying, and every small movement, every trembling finger, every shifted knee felt like a victory. Nathan watched from the doorway day after day, his eyes red-rimmed and wet. Samantha pretended not to notice. 2 weeks into the sessions, it happened. They were in the sunroom, working on a new exercise. Dr. Reyes had set up a line of overturned plastic cups, each one a few inches apart. "Knock them down," she said, demonstrating by gently tapping one with her foot. "Use your feet or your hands. Whatever works." Liam went first. He stretched his leg farther than he had before, and his foot connected with the first cup. It toppled over with a satisfying thunk. He grinned. Caleb followed, using his hand to swipe at a cup. It rolled across the floor, and he laughed, a quiet, breathy sound, but a laugh nonetheless. And then it was Ethan's turn. He stared at the cup in front of him. His leg trembled. His face scrunched up with concentration. And then slowly, so slowly, he lifted his foot. Not much, maybe an inch off the ground. But it was off the ground. Samantha's hand flew to her mouth. Nathan stepped forward, his voice breaking. "Ethan, buddy, you're doing it." Ethan's foot hovered in the air for a moment. Then it dropped, knocking the cup sideways. And Ethan smiled, a real, full, beautiful smile. Nathan dropped to his knees and pulled Ethan into his arms, his shoulders shaking with sobs. Samantha turned away, wiping her eyes. The real breakthrough came 3 days later. They were outside on the patio, the same patio where Samantha had drawn the chalk trails months ago. The weather was warm, the sky a perfect cloudless blue. Dr. Reyes had set up another trail, this one stretching from the patio steps to the edge of the lawn. Foam pads, plastic hoops, a stack of cushions at the end. "Okay," she said, addressing the boys. "This is the big one. Think you can make it all the way to the finish?" Liam nodded eagerly. Caleb looked nervous but determined. Ethan just stared at the trail like it was a mountain. They started together. Liam crawled first, his hands slapping against the foam pads, his legs dragging but moving. He made it halfway before stopping to rest. Caleb used his arms to pull himself forward, inch by inch. His face red with effort. Ethan didn't move. Samantha crouched beside him. "Are you okay?" He nodded. "You don't have to do this if you don't want to," she said gently. Ethan looked at her, then at his brothers, then at the trail. And then he pushed himself up onto his hands and knees. Samantha's breath caught. Nathan stepped forward, but Dr. Reyes put a hand on his arm, stopping him. "Let him try." Ethan wobbled. His arms shook. His legs barely supported his weight, but he moved, one hand forward, then the other, one knee, then the other, slow, painful, determined. The gardener stopped working. The housekeeper stood frozen in the doorway. Even the birds seemed to go quiet. Ethan made it 3 feet before his arms gave out. He collapsed onto the foam pad, breathing hard. Nathan knelt beside him, his hand on Ethan's back. "You did so good, buddy. So good." Ethan looked up at him, his eyes shining. Did I win?" Nathan's face crumpled. "Yeah, you won, but it was Caleb who shocked them all." He'd been moving slowly, steadily, using his arms to drag himself forward. But when he reached the edge of the patio, where the stone met the grass, he stopped. And then he stood up, not all the way, not steady, but he got his feet under him, his legs trembling, his hands gripping the edge of a nearby planter for support, and he took a step, one step, short, wobbly, like a toddler learning to walk for the first time. But a step. The gardeners gasped. The housekeeper screamed, "Doctor." Reyes grabbed Samantha's arm, her grip tight. Nathan stood frozen, his mouth open, tears streaming down his face. Caleb took another step, then another, and then his legs gave out and he sat down hard on the grass, laughing. Liam made it to the cushions 10 minutes later, crawling the whole way, but moving faster than he ever had before. When he reached the end, he flopped onto the pile and raised both arms in triumph. Nathan, Dr. Reyes, and Samantha stood at the edge of the lawn, watching 3 boys who'd been told they'd never move again, and they were moving. Not perfectly, not easily, but they were moving. Nathan turned to Samantha, his face wet with tears. "I don't know how to thank you." Samantha shook her head. "You don't need to." "Yes, I do." He took her hand, his grip warm and steady. "You gave them back to me." She looked at the boys, at Liam waving from the cushions, at Caleb laughing in the grass, at Ethan curled up on the foam pad with the biggest smile she'd ever seen. "They were always yours," she said softly. They just needed someone to see them. 6 months later, the Collins estate didn't feel like a museum anymore. The hallways that had once echoed with silence now rang with the sound of small feet and steady, often stumbling, but unmistakably there. The library where Margaret had sat with her cold tea and colder smile had been transformed into a playroom, complete with foam mats, building blocks, and a chalkboard covered in wobbly drawings. The garden was different too. Colored tape trails crisscrossed the lawn like a rainbow maze. A swing set had been installed near the fountain, and everywhere on the patio stones, the walkway, even the driveway, there were chalk drawings. Hopscotch grids, tic-tac-toe boards, crooked flowers, and stick figure families. It looked lived in, loved. It looked like a home. Samantha stood in the kitchen, flour dusting her hands, trying to remember the exact measurements for her grandmother's milk bread recipe. She'd made it 100 times growing up. But somehow, standing in this massive kitchen with its marble countertops and commercial-grade appliances, she felt like she was learning all over again. "You're putting too much sugar," Nathan said from the doorway. Samantha glanced up, startled. He was leaning against the frame, arms crossed, a small smile playing at his lips. I am not, she said. You are. I've watched you make this 3 times now. You always put too much sugar. The boys like it sweet. The boys would eat cardboard if you put frosting on it. Samantha laughed and wiped her hands on her apron. One of the fancy ones the housekeeper had insisted she use instead of the ratty dish towel she'd brought from the boarding house. She still wasn't used to this. Any of this. The kitchen. The house. Nathan standing there in a t-shirt and jeans instead of a suit, looking more relaxed than she'd ever seen him. The fact that she lived here now. It had started small, after the arrests. After the sessions with Dr. Reyes became routine. Nathan had offered to pay Samantha for her time. She'd refused. It didn't feel right. Taking money for something that had never been about money in the first place, but Nathan was persistent. You need a job, he'd said one afternoon, watching her help Liam balance on a foam beam, and the boys need you. Let me hire you officially as their, rehabilitation coordinator, Samantha had laughed. I don't have any credentials. You have something better, Nathan said. You have them. So she'd agreed, part-time at first, just a few hours a day. But as the boys progressed, as they went from crawling to stand-in to taking tentative steps, Samantha found herself spending more and more time at the estate. And then one night, when a storm knocked out the power at the boarding house and her room flooded, Nathan had offered her the guest suite, just until you find a new place, he'd said. That had been 4 months ago. She still hadn't looked for a new place. Nathan crossed the kitchen and peered into the mixing bowl. You're also using the wrong kind of yeast, Samantha swatted his hand away. I know what I'm doing. Do you? Yes. Then why did the last batch come out flat? It wasn't flat, it was rustic. Nathan grinned a real, full grin that made him look 10 years younger. Rustic. Right. Samantha rolled her eyes and went back to kneading the dough. But she was smiling. This had become their routine. Nathan would come home from the office. He was working half days now, spending more time with the boys, and find Samantha in the kitchen. Attempting some recipe from memory, he'd tease her, she'd argue back, and somehow, in the middle of flour and laughter, something had shifted between them, something warm, something easy, something that felt a lot like home. The sound of small feet thundering down the hallway interrupted them. A moment later, all 3 boys burst into the kitchen. Liam in the lead, Caleb close behind, and Ethan bringing up the rear with his careful, measured steps. We finished, Liam announced, waving a piece of paper in the air. Finished what? Nathan asked, crouching down to their level. The project, Caleb said, for Miss Reyes, Dr. Reyes had started giving them homework, small tasks to encourage fine motor skills and problem solving. This week's assignment had been to draw a picture of their favorite place. Liam thrust the paper at Nathan. Look. Nathan took it carefully and studied the drawing. 3 stick figures stood in the middle of what looked like a garden. One figure was tall with dark hair, clearly Nathan. Another was smaller with curly hair, Samantha. And between them, holding their hands, were 3 little figures with big smiles. Nathan's throat tightened. This is beautiful, he said quietly. That's us, Ethan said, pointing at the smallest figures. And that's you and Samantha in the garden, where we play. Nathan looked up at Samantha. She'd stopped kneading the dough, her hands still, her eyes suspiciously bright. Your favorite place is the garden? Nathan asked. Liam nodded eagerly. Because that's where we learn to walk, and where Samantha draws with us, Caleb added. And where you said we could get a dog, Ethan said hopefully. Nathan laughed, the sound rough but genuine. I said maybe we could get a dog, that's basically a yes, Liam said, later that night. After the boys were asleep and the kitchen was clean, Samantha and Nathan sat on the back patio with mugs of tea. The night was cool, the sky clear, string lights glowed softly overhead, casting gentle shadows across the stones. I've been thinking, Nathan said after a long silence. About what? About the future. He turned to look at her. About what comes next. Samantha's stomach flipped. Okay. The boys are doing so well, Nathan continued. Better than I ever thought possible. And that's because of you. It's because of them. Samantha corrected. They did the work, with your help. Nathan set his mug down and shifted to face her fully. I want to start a foundation, a rehabilitation program for families like ours. Families who've been told there's no hope. I want to teach them what you taught me, that sometimes the best therapy isn't expensive equipment or fancy doctors. It's just presence and patience and believing in the people you love. Samantha's chest tightened. Nathan, that's amazing. I want you to run it, he said. She blinked. What? The program. I want you to run it. Teach other families what you've taught us. He paused. I know you don't have a degree. But we can work around that. Hire people with credentials to handle the official stuff. But the heart of it, the philosophy, the approach that should come from you, Samantha stared at him, her mind reeling. I don't know what to say. Say yes, she laughed. The sound's shaky. You make it sound so simple. It is simple, Nathan said. You care. You see people. You don't give up. That's all it takes. Samantha looked out at the garden, at the colored trails still visible in the moonlight. She thought about her grandmother, about the boarding house, about bottle caps and chalk, and 3 little boys who'd taught her that hope could fit in the smallest gestures. Okay, she said softly. Yes. Nathan's face broke into a smile. Yeah. The foundation launched 3 months later. It was small at first, just a single room in the back of Giuseppe's that Rosa had helped them secure, a whiteboard, a bin of bottle caps and foam mats, a shelf of donated toys. But families came, parents who'd been told their children would never walk, caregivers who'd been told to accept limitations, kids who'd been written off as hopeless. And Samantha showed them what she'd learned. That movement could be a game, that progress didn't have to look like everyone else's, that sometimes the most important step was just showing up and trying. Nathan funded everything, the space, the materials, the staff, but he stayed in the background, letting Samantha lead, and she did. She taught workshops, answered questions, sat on floors with kids who reminded her of Liam, Caleb and Ethan, and showed them that their bodies weren't prisons. They were just scared, and fear could be untangled, one bottle cap at a time, 1 year after the foundation launched. Nathan and Samantha stood in the garden watching the boys race across the lawn. They weren't fast, they stumbled more often than not. But they were running, laughing, free. I can't believe this is real, Nathan said quietly. Samantha slipped her hand into his. It's real. He squeezed her fingers. I never thanked you. Not really. You don't have to. I do. He turned to face her, his eyes serious. You saved them. You saved me. Samantha shook her head. We saved each other, Nathan smiled, and then, so gently it made her heart ache. He leaned down and kissed her. It wasn't fireworks. It wasn't a grand declaration. It was warm, steady, real, when they pulled apart. Liam was standing a few feet away, grinning. Does this mean Samantha's staying forever? He asked. Nathan looked at Samantha, his eyebrows raised in question. She laughed. Yeah, I think it does. Liam whooped and ran back to his brothers, shouting the news, and Samantha, standing in the garden where it had all begun, realized something. She'd spent so much of her life feeling small, powerless, like she didn't matter, but here, with Nathan's hand in hers and 3 boys racing through the grass, she felt something else. She felt like she'd found her place. Not because someone had given it to her, but because she'd built it, one small step at a time.